Tanzania is a country in Africa that still creates national parks. 1/4 of her land is protected. Despite the continent's ever-growing population, Tanzania's national parks are not just isolated collections of animals. They are wildlife in an African wilderness. Wild places, spectacular and natural, held in trust for the future. Tanzania national parks are the guardians of the planet's last great herds. From the peaks of Mount Kilimanjaro to the depths of Lake Tanganyika, national parks are working hard to preserve the most diverse ecosystems in Africa. By buying this video, you contribute directly to that cause. Now join us on safari as Tanzania National Parks, together with world-renowned filmmakers, brings you a series of award-winning films and takes you to Serengeti and beyond, to this Eden in Africa.
Every year, this land is the setting for one of the great sights of the natural world, the migration of the wildebeest. Every year, they leave these plains and start their march in search of the grass and water they need to stay alive. By the time they return here, they will have traveled nearly 2,000 miles. 250,000 will have been born, and as many will have died. They will meet disaster and death on the way, but nothing will turn them aside. This is the story of a journey that has taken place for thousands of years every year. It is the year of the wildebeest. This is where the wildebeest live out their year, just south of the equator, in an area of plains and bush country stretching for over 10,000 square miles to its western boundary, the waters of Lake Victoria. It looks peaceful enough now, but it had a violent birth. To the north and south, it is bounded by steep Rift Valley escarpments, and down in the southeast, standing silent now, are the crater highlands, the massive volcanoes that years ago created the plains that lie below them. This is the crater Ngoro, the largest of the chain. Some 250,000 years ago, these volcanoes flung out ash, which buried the hills and valleys as if they had never been, and created the flat grassland that today is the last of the Edens for the great herds of animals that graze across it, the Serengeti. Now the land looks as if it has lain like this forever, But standing watch over it is one last volcano, Aldoño Lengai, that is still active. And still, from time to time, sends a puff of ash across the plains, a gentle reminder of the destruction that gave them birth. This, then, is the setting for the wildebeest's journey, a trek that will take them westwards towards Lake Victoria, then up towards the north, and finally will bring them back to the Central Plains. This is where they are now, and this is where our story begins. It is a story that involves vast numbers of animals, such as can be seen nowhere else on Earth. There are 18,000 eland. There are 200,000 zebra, garish and noisy. And looming bulky amongst them, 60,000 buffalo, stolidly breathing their own dust. There are 8,000 giraffe, and below them, 500,000 gazelle. And this is the creature that outnumbers them all, the least likely looking of the lot. The white-bearded gnu, or wildebeest. An animal apparently designed by a committee and assembled from spare parts. A comic, a knockabout comic at that. An engaging, unpompous creature, often called with affection the clown of the plains. In the calendar by which man measures his year, it is May. For the wildebeest, it will soon be time for the great trek to begin. The rainy season has ended. Rutting is about to begin. And so the young bulls try out their paces and each other. But for the older bulls, it is no game. Each bull fights to hold a territory on which he will collect his cows. He marks its boundaries by rubbing his face glands on the grass. A warning that beyond that point, the ground and the females on it are his. To other bulls, it clearly reads, "Keep out." But being wildebeest, the fighting is seldom serious. Often bulls will break off in the middle, pretending that they have seen a predator and must snort a warning to the others. It's a way of relieving the tension. In this case, a female rushes past with a calf. It's as good an excuse as any other, and one bull chases after her. By June, the bulls have divided up the plains within visible boundaries. The wildebeest are no longer scattered at random, but clumped in small groups of females, each under the command of a bull. Only those bulls that own a territory are entitled to females, and to keep both, they are always on the move, circling their own small herds and foraging after extra females. Cutting a new one out, pushing another back in, fighting other bulls. All this to ensure that next year's calves are fathered only by the best. For 6 months, these bulls have been building up reserves of fat, storing the energy that they will need in the next 2 months, for the journey and for the constant fighting and patrolling, and for mating when the females are ready. This one isn't, and decides not to cooperate by taking action as simple as it is effective. When the male gets too near, she just sits down. But while the wildebeest are absorbed in their own interests, the predators are pursuing theirs. The cheetahs are too lightweight to pull down an adult wildebeest. The 4-month-old calves are fair game. But even then, the cheetahs must work in pairs, one to distract any protective adult, the other to go for the calf. And that is one young wildebeest that will never make the journey which is about to begin. For the past 6 months, the herds have eddied back and forth on the open plains. But they're drying out now. The water is getting scarce, and so the herds start to move off, heading northwest. It isn't a sudden start. They form straggling lines, drifting casually towards the edge of the plain. There is still grass to be eaten, and they graze as they go. A few water holes still have water, and they linger there. A brief resting place before the real journey begins. Then these last few holes dry up and crack in the summer sun. It is time for the herds to go. 1 million animals pouring off the plain in a jumbling torrent of legs, horns, and dust. Mile after mile they go, through the granite rocks that border the plains and into the bush country beyond. The west and the north have a higher rainfall and so more grass. Now the herds must find it. As soon as they reach a greener area and are able to slow down, the bulls start to mark out new territories. But there isn't time now to establish the boundaries clearly, and so they fight and skirmish even harder than before. And now the females are ready to mate. There are 300,000 of them, and 90% become pregnant every year. It looks like chaos, and in some ways it is, but it works, and the numbers prove it. There are so many wildebeest that they move over the land like locusts, searching for grass to sustain them. All the hoofed animals of the Serengeti are able to exist